All right, well, tonight's workshop is one of my personal favorites. It is all about landscape myths busted. And we are going to go through a lot of different things that you may have heard or read about and tell you the truth. Now, after this workshop is completed, you are going to get an email from Zoom. Now, check your spam and your junk folder and all that stuff to make sure that the Zoom thing, makes it into an inbox. Because sometimes that's weird with Zoom. But that email is going to have a link to this book, a PDF to this book, and also a link to some other resources, including a link to all the classes that we have recorded for this program over the last 6 months. So we very much would like you to go ahead in and watch this class again, but also you can check out all these other classes as well. Now, Joe, I see that you have
I'm back.
you've got it working.
Yeah. I don't know
Uh,
what I did, but yeah.
it's so great to see you. I'm wondering if you and or Veronica would like to say something before we get going.
Well, I would like to start off by saying that how much we appreciate G3 Gardens Group and everything that they do for us. Marion and Pamela, they work really hard on getting these classes together, and we're proud of them. And this is something we've been doing for a number of years, and we plan to continue to do more years. And so, if you folks can think of any classes that you would be interested in, for an example, I was thinking of one. I know it sounds kind of, I come up with these things with Pamela and Marianne, okay? So one of them I was thinking planting an Italian garden, okay? And maybe doing a little cooking with it. I don't know, just crossed my
Oh, we
mind.
like that.
A little Sicilian breaded meat and a little dinner. But I don't know. These are crazy things that I think in my mind. But maybe an Italian garden that you have to grow garlic, parsley, oregano, so those types of things. But anyway, just a
A
thought.
pizza garden.
Yeah, the pizza garden. Yeah. So anyway, we welcome everybody here. And Veronica, you go ahead now.
Yes, good evening, everyone. Again, as Joe said, thank you, Pamela and Marianne. It's been a wonderful year of great webinars. We much appreciate every single one of them. And just to let you know, I do get wonderful feedback from my customers who attend your classes. So thank you so much. I also want to remind everybody who is one of our customers, if you are a California American Water customers, we are still promoting our rain sensor program, especially as rain is approaching us, heavy rain around our area. If you're interested in a rain sensor, please give us a call. Again, this is only for California American Water customers in the Monterey Peninsula. I will post our office number along with our website for more information. It's completely free. And all you have to do is give us a call and we'll let you know if you qualify. And ladies, thank you again. You
Thank
guys
you
are
so
wonderful.
much. Well, let's roll into this class. It's so much fun. Again, landscape myths busted. So I'm just going to get myself set up here to move forward. All right. Well, tonight, instead of 6, we actually have 7 items we're going to cover. We'll talk about soil, rainwater capture, planting, irrigation, water conservation myths, and also turf removal myths. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about maintenance. So just as a quick background, the reason we built this class is because of this. we heard from so many people, oh, we don't want any of that xeriscaping. It's all desert and cactus. Well, that is true. Xeriscaping would be, but xeriscaping is something different. Also, native gardens look messy and unkempt. They never work. And we took all the grass out, but it all grew back and it looks worse. The truth is, you can actually have a successful garden, something that looks just like this. And you don't have to ever sacrifice beauty in order to have a landscape that is resilient and low water and beautiful really all year round. You can enjoy the sun or have a beautiful shade garden as long as you follow these 4 keys to success. So these are the four principles of the watershed approach to landscaping. And they are, first of all, that we focus on building healthy living soil that acts like a sponge. It holds on to water in dry times and it releases water slowly in wet times, which is going to be really important for the next couple of days. Spongy soil is absolutely the most important thing we do in the garden, and with it, we can pretty much do anything. Without it, everything is a challenge. We're going to capture rainwater and use it as a resource. That means that the water that comes from the sky, free when it does come, we're going to direct it into the landscape and into that spongy soil so that it gets held on to there for the benefit of all the plants. And then we're going to select climate appropriate plants. These are plants that are adapted to our particular climate. For us, those are local California native plants, sort of first and foremost, but there are actually many plants from Mediterranean climates that work beautifully on the Monterey Peninsula. And once we've done those three things, healthy soil, capturing rainwater, selecting climate appropriate plants, then if we need irrigation, we use highly efficient supplemental irrigation. That means that we are making sure we're using equipment that is manufactured properly, and our irrigation system has been designed, installed, and is maintained properly. And we're actually managing our irrigation controller. We put in a smart controller so that we're not irrigating just because it's Tuesday. We're actually irrigating because the landscape needs it. So when we add these four key elements into our plan for our landscape, we end up with a watershed wise landscape, and we end up with a landscape that can be very successful. And then on top of it, it's really beginning to get the tools for sorting through the fact from the myth. We all are, I'm sure, inundated by social media and by lots of other kinds of media, print media, and so forth. And it's really sometimes hard to figure out, well, what is the right thing to do? Do not despair. That is what tonight is all about. So let's talk about the probably greatest misunderstood thing in a landscape, soil. The first myth is probably the most profound, and that is that there's no difference between dirt and soil. There's also a myth that clay is the worst type of soil, that somehow if we have clay, we're in a bad situation. Well, the truth is that clay is the best soil to have in a dry climate like California. And also, the real culprit in our gardens is something called compaction. Compaction is when there is no sponginess to the soil whatsoever. And when that happens, we end up with a brick, and that is the real culprit for problems in our landscape, not whether it's sand, silt, or clay. Here's a myth that adding sand or gravel to clay will actually make it drain better. I can't tell you how many times I have read this. This is guidance that I've seen in, famous books as being the secret to making a better draining, healthier landscape. And the truth of the matter is, when you add sand and gravel to clay, you make concrete. That is actually the recipe for concrete. Instead of adding anything that is inert like sand or gravel, we want to use organic matter. So organic materials like compost or worm castings or mulch, these are the things that will actually help you with drainage. This is a myth that needs to be busted big time. When uh, the kind of reverse is there, which is people have sandy soils, and the advice is, well, add clay to that soil in order to help it hold on to water. Again, nothing could be further from the truth. This is another way to make concrete. So the thing is that whether you have sand, silt, or clay, you cannot change the inherent properties of the soil particles. This is something that is unchangeable. But what you can change is the structure of the soil. You can make your soil more spongy instead of more like a brick. If you added clay to soil, this would actually turn it into a brick. You don't want that, or into concrete. You want it to be spongy. And the only way that you can get that is by adding organic matter. This is busted. Adding organic matter uh, and adding plants. The truth of the matter is that everything about a healthy garden and healthy soil starts and ends with soil microbiology. We need to find ways to convert our dirt into soil. Soil is alive, dirt is dead. And we can tell that this soil is alive just by the fact that you see all those worms that are in there. Soil is actually alive with billions and billions of microbial actors, and they all have different roles to play. They have bacteria in them, which are able to decompose rock and turn it into particles. We have protozoa in there that eat bacteria and that actually do things like adding nitrogen into the soil. We have nematodes in our soil that are perfectly healthy. They're actually great actors, the nematodes, because they start a cycle of nutrition in the soil when the soil is healthy. When the soil is compacted or overwatered, those nematodes, many of them, will switch and become bad actors, and then they actually start to eat themselves and they eat the roots of plants. But as long as we're managing our irrigation and we are actually adding organic matter and promoting this soil microbiology, nematodes that are in our soil are really, really good actors. And then on top of it, we have something called the fungal network in soils. And the fungal network is sort of the apex of the microbiological structure. And the fungal network actually moves nutrients and water and all kinds of stuff around the entire landscape. Now, a big myth that is actually promoted by fertilizer manufacturers is that compost is fertilizer. That is absolutely untrue. The truth is that compost is an organic material. It feeds microbes that are in the soil. It does not, in and of itself, have any particular nutrient in it. And when you want to build a healthy soil sponge, you need to be adding compost. Again, this is organic matter, and the compost is the most important thing. We also want to make sure that we cover the top of the ground with at least 3 to 4 inches of what we call live mulch. Live mulch is mulch that came from plants. It's debris from plants. So it's leaves and little bits of wood and stuff like that. It's not something that is dead like decomposed granite. And then the other thing that we need to add into the landscape in order to get really nice spongy soil is plants, because the plant roots are actually the workers that will restructure the soil from being dirt and turn it into sponge. A big myth that I have read many, many times is that it takes eons to build a topsoil. And the truth of this is it can happen in a matter of months. You can build inches of topsoil really within the span of 6 or 7 months by doing something called sheet mulching, sometimes called sheet composting. This is essentially a way of covering grass with paper and mulch and adding water and allowing it all to decompose from the top down and creating that beautiful soil structure from the top down. Another myth is that when you are planting native plants, California natives, they should just go straight into the ground. That if you have any compost around, or I mean, even in some cases, mulch, that this makes the soil too rich. And when someone says that the soil is too rich, what they mean is that there's too much nutrient in the soil. And that native plants, it's true, do not like to have a lot of nutrient. They don't require a lot of nutrient in order to thrive. But remember, a few slides ago, I told you compost does not have nutrient in it. It has organic matter to feed the microbes that make the nutrient for the plants when the plants ask for it. So compost is not too rich. Compost is exactly the right thing. There's no nutrient in it. And when we are dealing with most of our soils in our landscapes. We're actually dealing with extremely compacted and very, very depleted soils, especially if they had grass on top of them and have been overwatered for decades. These soils are very dead and they need to be brought back to life. And the only way to bring them back to life is to support that microbial community. And the only way to support the microbial community is to add compost. We call this microbial community the soil party, by the way, because all these microbes are in the soil having fun. They're eating and doing all kinds of fun stuff. And so, in order to encourage them, in order to grow them and really create the billions and billions needed for good soil, we need to add compost. Big myth, especially if you are a vegetable gardener, but really for any kind of gardening, a myth is that the soil needs to be cultivated in order to grow a garden. And the truth of the matter is, this is how you destroy the soil party. This is how you kill microbial activity in your soil. So we want you to eliminate as much of the cultivation as possible and basically do what's called a no-till solution. We want you to make sure that you do not disturb the soil, because every time you disturb the soil, you have to add compost. You have to get that microbial community going again. Big myth in a lot of established landscapes is that bare earth is the best because it's nice and clean. But nature is not like that. It does not like things to be nice and clean. Actually, I'd never noticed this before, but if you look at the middle of this picture, at the plant that's in the dead middle of the picture, and go up onto the leaves right in the front, you see that there are these like spots on the leaves. That's interesting. Those would not be there if this plant was not in bare earth. I guarantee you that. Um, but yeah, bare earth is the worst condition for plants. They want to have a lot of good mulch. And you know this because they drop their leaves onto the ground. So leave the leaves. That's the best thing that you can do for plants is leave their leaves in place. If you do any pruning, you chop and drop that material onto the ground. Also, leave the flowers there. Anything that drops onto the ground, it does not need to be raked up and put away. Even if there might be a little blight or something on those flowers, it doesn't matter as long as there's good ground cover like leaf material or mulch on the ground. It's actually a way that the ecosystem inoculates itself, is to have the flowers and the fruit and so forth from the plant fall onto the ground and decompose there. Now, of course, if you are being inundated by dropping fruit, you can clean that up. But in general, keep the leaves and the flowers on the ground. Here's a myth. The myth of the mulch fire, that mulch is the big contributor to fire. Well, the truth of the matter is that most homes, 60 to 90% of homes, are burned due to embers that enter into the attics through unscreened, open vents that do not have screens on them. So it's not about the mulch, it's really about home hardening. Here's a myth that you can't use mulch on hillsides because it'll just slide off. Well, that's not true because the mulch is part of a program to actually build all this microbial community. And when the fungal network starts to build, it will knit together all of that mulch and hold it beautifully in place so that it can decompose and keep things protected. So no, it doesn't slide off of hillsides. The fungal network holds it in place. Here's a myth that when you use mulch, it invites termites. Well, if you have mulch right up against a wood portion of your home, so let's say that you have wood siding that comes all the way down to the ground and there's no gap between the wood siding and the ground, you probably have termites anyway. Because the termites seek out wet and decaying wood. So it's not about the mulch being the thing that invites termites. It's about having mulch or really anything that's up against the home structure and specifically against wood that's on the home. So leave at least a 12-inch gap between where the mulch ends and where your home begins, and fill that gap with small gravel or pavers or something else, but don't put that mulch right up against your home, and it will not invite termites. There are so many benefits to having mulch that it far outweighs any of these potential myths that we've already busted anyway. It keeps the soil cool and moist. It manages weeds so they're not able to germinate. It feeds that soil party the microbial activity, and it definitely helps with erosion by knitting everything together and holding hillsides. But all mulches are not the same. So myth number 4, that it doesn't matter what kind of mulch you use, it's all good. No, that's not true. If you use one of these 4 types of mulches, you are doing something wrong. The rubber mulch explodes in fire and is pretty darn toxic. The dyed mulches do not decompose well. They are often comprised of furniture and pallets that have been dyed, and so that you don't see what the stuff is. Gorilla hair is also something that doesn't decompose. It's also bad for fire. And the same for walk-on bark. These are 2 large pieces of mulch. They don't decompose. We want to have mulch that is tiny and decomposes. So we really want to have mulch that's smaller than 1.5 inches, if at all possible, and that is a mixture of what we call green and brown. That means that it's not just bark, but it also has some tree leaves in it, and it's a fine mixture of these things. That is really what we're looking for, because that will decompose pretty quickly. And when the mulch is decomposing, great benefits are occurring because your microbial family or microbial activity in the soil is boosted. There's a myth that using pine or eucalyptus will stunt plant growth, and this is absolutely not true. Eucalyptus, let me see if the slide, eucalyptus really only stunts plant growth when it is alive. And that's because it's a giant plant and it needs a lot of resources. So it's kind of hard to have other plants that are not from Australia around a eucalyptus tree. But you can find many, many plants that are Australian plants that work beautifully around eucalyptus, and almost any plant will grow perfectly fine in eucalyptus leaves and also mulch made of eucalyptus. Pine needles are another thing that don't decompose very quickly. And because they don't decompose very quickly, they're a little bit tougher to grow things in, but certainly it's great for more pine trees and anything that might be from a pine community. You do want to keep in mind that when pine needles get too deep, and if you're in a fire zone, you're going to want to actually remove some of those pine needles and put them into a compost bin so they compost. Generally, pine needles will pile up, take so long for them to decompose that over a couple of years you could have as much as 6 or 7 inches of that stuff, and that's just not a very good scenario for fire considerations. So definitely manage your pine mulch, but it doesn't mean that plants are going to be stunted. Plants are perfectly happy to be growing in both of these mulches. How about some myths around rainwater? One of the things about rainwater capture is that we have spent many decades trying to get rid of water off our properties. And so it brings up a lot of old fears. One of the myths we have is that we don't get enough rain. But the numbers really don't lie. For every 1 inch of rain on 1,000 square foot of roof, it generates 620 gallons of water. That means that in just a 10-inch rain event, or a couple events that give you 10 inches of rain, you get 6,200 gallons of water. That is enough water for an entire year in a landscape of 1,000 square feet in the Monterey Peninsula. So we don't need really any more water than the rainwater. We just need to figure out how to hold on to it. Big myth that rain gardens, if we actually make a way to capture rain on our property, we would be causing flooding. But the truth of the matter is that we get flooding because we don't have rain gardens in our landscapes. This is absolutely a myth that gets to be busted. Many people think that rain gardens are ponds and that this water is going to be sitting there on their landscape all year round. But the truth is, this is an ephemeral thing. It is only filled with water, usually for a couple hours after a rainstorm. The whole purpose of a rain garden is to slow down the water, spread it out, and sink it into the ground and into the plant roots and mulch and disappear. A myth that boulders and lots of gravel and all kinds of heavy stuff is needed in order to have a rain garden, when the truth is stone is an optional thing. You absolutely do not need it. It is purely aesthetics to add stones. It's even better if you don't have any at all and you just plant your rain garden and make it a vegetated area. Like what you see here, this is a rain garden and it's planted, and you wouldn't even know that it was a rain garden if I didn't tell you it was there. Here's a big one. The myth that rain gardens attract mosquitoes. Well, that's not true because the water is not standing in these rain gardens. It disappears very, very quickly, and certainly within 72 hours, which is the required amount of time in order to get larvae going from mosquitoes. So that is definitely a myth. A myth is that rain barrels are the best way or a really good way to store water. And the truth of the matter is that rain barrels only store about maybe 50 gallons, and you're getting 620 gallons off of 1,000 square foot of roof. So rain barrels are not so much about storage of water as they are about slowing down the water that's coming off the roof and allowing you to spread it into the landscape from there. There is the myth that if it's not actually concrete or a poured surface of some kind, it must be permeable. In other words, all grass is permeable. But the truth of the matter is that permeability is determined more by compaction than anything else. And a typical lawn is not very permeable. Water runs off of a typical lawn. It will also run off of things like bare soil or decomposed granite. These things are not concrete per se, but they act like concrete. We want to make sure that your turf grass, if you have it, and in fact, any surface, any planted surface is more permeable. And so with your grass, each year you want to go through a process of dethatching it, aerating it, and adding compost so that you are keeping even your grass lawn as permeable as possible. You're keeping those roots going so you can have healthy living soil even in the grass area, and you can hold on to rainwater even there. Let's talk about some planting myths. This is something that we could spend hours talking about, but we're going to pare it down to the big ones. The first myth is that all plants need fertilizers to grow, and nothing could be further from the truth. Synthetic fertilizers actually make your roots weak. They make your whole plant susceptible to chewing insects and to other pathogens. Your resilience is decreased, and adverse effects like cold or drought or heat even are all things that will harm a plant that has been fertilized. So we do not want to add any synthetic fertilizers to the landscape because it just weakens our plants. We want to remember that plants are actually in control of their environments. They are using the sun's radiation to take that carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, and they have this extraordinary ability to convert all that CO2 into lots of really good chemistry that they use to build their bodies and make their flowers and their fruit, but also to sequester in the ground and to feed the microbial community so that the microbial community will be really vast and really diverse and will be able to make the nutrients that the plant needs when it needs it, and also will be able to create an immune system for the plant. So we have to remember that because plants are in charge of their environment, it's very little that we can do looking at the stuff on top to divine, oh, the plant needs this or that. What we really need to do is just boost that soil microbial activity. There's a myth in planting that we should only be using local natives. And while it's a great goal to be maximizing the use of local native plants in your landscape, we are in a Mediterranean climate, and really plants from all over the Mediterranean areas are completely appropriate for our gardens in the Monterey Peninsula. And the real goal of our planting plans should be to maximize biodiversity and the density of plants. Sometimes there just aren't native plants to do the job, and they're not available. So we look instead to also use these Mediterranean plants from places like Chile and the Mediterranean Basin and South Africa and Australia, and we add them into our palettes so that we are having as much biodiversity and as much density as we possibly can in the landscape. Boop. A myth that drought tolerant plants don't need irrigation. Well, that's not true, because first of all, plants that have been transplanted from a pot need to get established. And in order to get established, they're going to need some water. If it does not come from the sky at the right time, they're going to need irrigation in order to do that. So we have to find a way to use irrigation judiciously in order to get our plants established. Also, here's a myth that things like roses and camellias are real water hogs, and so we don't plant them, and they love their bases to be completely bare. I mean, I know you've been to a lecture or a discussion with a rosarian who's told you something like this. And the truth of the matter is that is completely wrong. Both roses and camellias are incredibly drought tolerant once they're established. They appreciate having their roots covered even more than bare soil. They love to have a nice cool base, so they love to have 3 to 4 inches of mulch around their base, keeping those roots cool and watered enough, but not too much, not lots of water at all. There's a myth that the only time you can plant is in the fall. Now, it's a little truth in that, because the cooler weather is actually the best time to plant. But if you pay attention to your soil health and to doing your irrigation properly, you can really plant at any time, unless it's really, really hot or it's really, really wet. You don't want to be working with wet soil at all, because that's how compaction happens. And you don't want to be working in the really hot time, because soil microbes don't like it when it's too hot. So as long as you stay away from that, from those two particular times, you can pretty much plant any time of the year. Okay, here's a myth. Ficus makes a great hedge. Just look at these pictures. Do I need to say anything more? That's busted. It's the worst hedge. Ice plant, great for slopes, right? No, not so much. Ice plant actually pulls down slopes. There are much better options. This is a great place for you to look to the California native plants that are creepers along the ground, and shrubs that have really deep, beautiful root systems to hold on to things. Oh, here's a myth that our California natives are scraggly and they don't have any color. Well, the truth is, if you properly design your landscape, it can be green and lush all year round. And actually, you add in other plants that are not California natives, and you get color pretty much all year round. Here's a myth that grass roots are naturally very shallow. And boy, nothing could be further from the truth. Grass roots are naturally deep. It's our maintenance practices that make them shallow. Grass roots are among the very best things for sequestering carbon And the only way that we can make them do that is if we keep organic matter in the soil, irrigate properly, enhance that biology, and plant multiple species of grass so that we don't have just one, but we have a bunch of different kinds. Tree roots, oh, they only extend a few feet from the trunk, right? Nope. Tap roots can go many, many feet, in fact, yards, miles deep. And the roots of a tree are generally at least as wide as the canopy of the tree. They may even grow further than that, but they are at least as wide. So when you look at a tree, realize you're only seeing about 20% of what's going on. The rest of it's all underground. Here's a myth. If you really want to keep your turf grass nice and healthy, you should mow it really short. Definitely not. If you want to have healthy grass, keep it long. Longer grass blades create a little bit of shade. That saves you a lot on water. You save about 30% actually by keeping your grass longer. And this way the plants can focus on keeping their roots healthy and keeping that microbial activity going instead of trying to heal this constant injury that's happening to their leaves. So this is definitely a myth. Uh, the myth of monoculture is something that we really have to get over. The idea that planting a monoculture is the very best thing, it's a total myth. We really want to have as much diversity as possible in our landscapes and even in our grasses and in our lawn and so forth. If you did want to keep a lawn, the way you reduce the amount of water that's required is you put things like clover and other things into that lawn and boost that diversity, and your system health improves and the amount of water you need decreases. Here's some irrigation myths. Boy, the word myth is actually hard to say over and over. Irrigation myths are very prevalent. Now, the first one, of course, is that we have to have irrigation in California. Um, that is a myth because if we planted and appropriately for the climate and we captured all the rainwater and put it in the soil, after establishment, we could pretty much do without irrigation. But it is something that we want to have our eye on because at times irrigation is necessary. It really depends on when the plants have been installed. If they're installed in the fall and we get rain in that winter, it's possible that we could reduce or eliminate the irrigation within the first year. But it's not guaranteed that we're going to get the rain from the sky in the wintertime. So we may need to have that establishment water. Also, there are some plants that are even the California natives that do require a little summer water when they're in a garden setting. So when they're in a place where everything is controlled, they need a little bit more help. And of course, climate change is actually making our dry time drier and our wet time wetter. So even very dry land natives might be requiring that we add water in the wintertime. And when we make a soil sponge and we capture rain and we select climate appropriate plants, we can probably do away with irrigation at least in the second or third year. Here's a myth that spray irrigation mimics rain, and so it's much better than drip because, leaves need to be hosed off. Boy, this is a huge myth. Absolutely not true. First of all, spray does not mimic rain at all, not even a little. The thing to note here is that plants take up the water from their roots, not from their leaves. They need the water in the ground. So drip is far better, far more targeted to giving the water to the plants in the ground. And that's where the water needs to be. There's also the myth that it's really easy to just convert your spray heads into drip. Hey, here's a quick and easy little thing. Let's just put it together. But the truth is, it's rarely easy to do. Conversions actually require a little bit of know-how. There are some conditions in which it's relatively easy to do it, but for the most part, it's better if you're going to do a conversion to drip to have a professional involved. Here's the myth that you can just use these old valves. I mean, just convert them, keep these valves in place and convert the spray heads into drip tubing. Well, that's definitely a myth because when you switch to drip irrigation, your valve has to change too. You need to have a new low flow valve in order to have good results. Hey, here's a myth. Just set the timer and we're set for the rest of the year. Nope. Guess what? When we program an irrigation controller, we program for the summertime. That's when the plants need the most water. But in the fall and in the spring, and of course in the winter, they may not need any water, but in the fall and the spring, the sunlight is a lot less. And so the plants don't need as much water. It's even if it's hot, because the days are shorter, they are not requiring the water. So the program is always going to be different in the spring and in the fall and in the summertime. So we definitely want to adjust our program, at least cutting by 50% in the spring and fall, and then turning it off in the winter if it's raining. Wow, this is a great myth, and honestly, this is one of the greats. Plants die from lack of water. Look at this picture. You tell me, is this too dry or too wet? And how would you even know? Well, first of all, you would know because you would stick a soil probe in the ground or even your finger or a stick in the ground and see if there's water there at the roots of the plants. I would bet you money that this is a situation where it's too wet. The challenge with plants being too wet or too dry is that above ground, they look exactly the same. The response to those conditions is the same, this kind of appearance. It's much more likely that the plant was too wet because the improper watering, the over application of watering is really the number one reason that plants die. So I would bet too wet is the reason. Here's a myth. It looks wet on top of the surface soil, so it must be wet below. But no, look, this person has pulled back the mulch and the little bit of soil on top that was wet to reveal that it's bone dry beneath. And this is because when soils aren't covered with a bunch of mulch and there isn't a lot of microbial activity going on, the soil can actually become what's called hydrophobic, and it sheds water rather than receiving it. On top of it, it could just be that the infiltration rate is very slow here, and so it takes a long time for water to go into the soil, and the water here was applied too quickly. In order to find out how much water is in the soil, you need to probe down below the surface. Getting a soil probe is probably one of the best tools that you could have in a landscape. Remember, what you see going on above ground is just a snippet of what's actually happening. The real action is down at the roots. Here's a myth that I have heard since the very first days of gardening, and that is that when you water at night, you're going to get powdery mildew and other problems. Well, I want you just to think about that a second. Does it ever rain at night? Yeah, there it is. It rains at night. So that can't possibly be the reason that you're getting powdery mildew. It's not about the time of day that you are watering. It's about the fact that you are watering too much and you're not allowing the soil to dry out in between watering. That's really what it's about. Okay, let's talk about some water conservation myths. Here's one. Dead grass is easier to remove. Oh boy, it's not. What about gravel ground cover saves water? Or decomposed granite ground cover and cactuses. That's a landscape that really saves water, right? Hey, what about artificial turf? That saves water and it's a very sustainable solution. Well, all of these things are totally busted. Gravel ground cover kills the soil sponge. Decomposed granite kills the soil sponge. Artificial turf kills the soil sponge and is definitely not sustainable. These all require more water. When you have artificial turf, you have to understand that artificial turf is plastic, and therefore you're putting plastic bags in your front yard, you're raising the temperature of your front yard, you're raising your temperature of your neighborhood. Oh, by the way, that usually does have an impact on the temperature of your home. But also what's going on here is you're killing all the microbial activity in soil, and that's what makes it spongy. That's what makes it work for stormwater capture and everything else. What they don't tell you about artificial turf is that every 10 years you really need to replace it, and that goes into a landfill. Also, it needs to be washed down regularly because it does have a lot of dust and debris that gets on it. There's zero habitat value to it. Lots of toxic chemicals in both the decomposing grass itself and the crumb that's used to keep those grasses standing up. It's a huge source of microplastic pollution. And oh, by the way, it's expensive. You can do a real landscape in the same price as you can do with artificial turf. And one of the biggest myths of all time is that fewer plants require less water. That if you only plant, let's say, 3 plants, every couple hundred feet, this is going to be a way to save water. But that's not true. The only way to save water is to plant lots and lots and lots of plants and allow them to work together to hold on to water in the soil. Lots of plants, very diverse plantings, and lots of different combinations of trees and shrubs and ground cover. The whole system works together to reduce the amount of water that is needed. We have a huge impact. This is a big myth that when we remove plants, we're not having a big impact on the, ecosystem, the environment, and we're actually having a huge impact. When we take plants out of the equation, we don't have a lot of them there, we're actually increasing the ambient temperature of the around us. We're increasing the temperature of the soil. The only thing here that is at a lower temperature than the ambient temperature of 108 degrees is the Bermuda grass at 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Everything else is 60 degrees hotter. I mean, this has a very, very significant impact on our environment. And the consequence of not believing the myths about soil and about planting lots and lots of plants is that we actually create what's called a hydrophobic condition. This is a condition where our soils and our landscapes actually repel water and they make drought deeper. It leads to dust storms and decreasing habitat and hotter days and rainier winters, and the climate becomes a lot more variable because of this lack of plant material in the environment. Hey, drought is over. We don't need to worry about anything, right? Well, the truth of the matter is that's a big myth because history shows us that drought is totally cyclical. There will be another drought and it will come soon. So we need to be thinking about drought and water conservation at all times. It's a critical component of landscaping, but taking out plants is not the way to respond to water conservation. Now, what about removing our grass? We definitely need to have herbicide to remove our grass, right? Well, no. Actually, those chemicals are not gone in 24 hours. There are consequences. This is a big myth. This symbol is on the back of all your herbicides and pesticides. Why are we putting them in the landscape? Um, and what we found over time is that actually all of these applications of pesticides and herbicides are having an incredible detrimental effect on our landscape. We actually need to just remove grass without chemicals. Physical removal is the best way, and then replacing it by planting densely. Here's a big old myth that is still being sold by contractors, the myth that weed fabric prevents weeds. Absolutely not. Weed fabric makes weeds. If you want to have something that blocks weeds, you use paper and 3 to 4 inches of mulch, not weed fabric. Myth, even for weeding, that, hey, you just need to get down and start pulling on those weeds. Well, actually, every time we pull out a weed, or spray it with an herbicide, we're disturbing the soil microbial community and we're making it so more weeds need to come to fix things. So please don't pull your weeds. Cut them at the ground level. And that way they cannot photosynthesize, which means they can't continue to grow. Now, some weeds do store energy in a big root, or a bulb or something, but over a couple of cuts, they will diminish that energy and they will no longer be able to grow. And meanwhile, you haven't set up a condition that, brings on more weeds. So let's talk about maintenance myths. The biggest myth of all is that gardens are no maintenance. These drought tolerant, low water gardens, they may be less work, but you actually need maintenance on every garden in order to stay healthy. A myth that plants need to be pruned regularly? Absolutely not. They should never be pruned. Plants should only be pruned for disease, um, death, if something is dead, if they are going in the wrong direction, that these are the only reasons to prune. But regular pruning just for so is not good. Myth that bugs are bad. Actually, there's a very small percentage of insects are harmful, which means that they would actually affect humans or property. And most insects are incredibly valuable. And with all these practices that people keep using to follow down the myth, we are actually really diminishing them. And instead, we could be inviting pollinators and lots of natural allies that can come into the landscape to eliminate insects that are, that we are unwanted in a natural way. And this eliminates pesticides and boosts biodiversity. The myth that weeds are bad is something that has really kept us from having beautiful gardens. The truth is that things that are weeds, we call them forbs actually, they each have a very particular purpose. They have like a super strength. They are able to mine nutrients or share resources in particular ways. And so weeds actually can tell you what the landscape is lacking, and they will arrive on your landscape in order to heal a situation that is imbalanced. So if you have weeds on your property, there's a reason for it. They're there to help you. Uh, Even when we have a lawn, we really need to have multi-species. So if we're thinking about using anything to try to eliminate weeds and so forth out of our landscapes, let's think again. If we can't cut them at the base and they're like in our lawn or whatever, maybe we just let them go. Like maybe they're actually helping the lawn. In fact, they are helping the lawn, but maybe we need to get our head around that. A big myth is that if we want to maintain the health of our landscapes, we have to control things. We have to kill things and control things. And actually, I think instead of a philosophy of killing things, we need to create a philosophy of promoting things. What do we need to promote? How do we grow something better in our landscapes? Let's shift the paradigm of how we think about our management of pests and weeds and really the whole management of our landscape. And instead of saying, hey, this thing's a problem, why don't we think of, hey, if this thing is bugging us, how do we add something in here that can help us to manage this situation instead of trying to eliminate it? So adding is always better than subtracting in a garden. And perhaps the greatest myth of all is that we humans know how to do it better than nature. I mean, listen, since the beginning of time and, however 40 something billion years, plants have been doing R&D, right? They've been figuring this thing out. We have oxygen in our environment, in our atmosphere that gave the rise to us only because of these guys, these plants, and also the soil microbial community. So they've got it figured out. Why don't we work with them instead? It's an incredibly complex and perfect, really, uh, garden that we live in, and we can really let nature be our guide and follow what we really see instead of what we think we see. So that's the last landscape myth busted. All right. Next steps, we really want you to get out there and get into your garden, apply for some rebates. There are a bunch of them. Hopefully that link was put into the chat, and don't worry, it's going to come to you in the email that you're going to get. There are water saving water conservation devices like these tree rings that are available, also water conservation audits. I want to tell you, those audits are like one of the best thing ever. If you have not done one of those yet, get in touch with California American Water to get your conservation audit. There's some cash for grass. We heard about the soil moisture sensors and weather-based irrigation controllers, cisterns, tree rings, lots of stuff. These are all free things, rebates and resources for you. You're going to get a link to help you access them. So I'm going to stop sharing. Let's see, maybe one question while people fill out the evaluation.
Yeah, we had some great questions, lots of interest about soil, building the soil health. There's lots of information that'll be coming to you in the guidebook you're getting there. So hopefully that will give you some tips. Here's one, a question about fungus on oak trees. And it wasn't the sudden death fungus, but I thought it would be, if you wanted to share a little bit about how we want to look at fungus, that may be a myth.
Yeah, well, there's a little bit to this. So apologies in advance that this is going to be, your kind of truncated little answer, which is, by the way, part of the reason myths get propagated anyway is because people try to answer things as like silver bullets or one simple thing to do, and that's, I think, a lot of times how myths come about. But anyway, all right, so there are several funguses in soil that, when the soil is healthy and when there's a diversity of plant material and an abundance of different kinds of plant material, that soil health actually keeps the fungus healthy. And so the fungus is there doing its thing, decomposing dead material and acting beautifully. But when the soil gets, and usually it's overwatering, when it's overwatered, when the diversity of plant material is reduced, when there isn't good organic matter in the soil, maybe it's gotten compacted because you've had construction or something like that. But mostly it really is all about overwatering. Those fungus that are normally really good actors switch roles and they become bad actors. And so they will start to eat living root instead of eating decayed or dead root or dead wood. And so the cause of this is the overwatering. The fungus will switch back to being a good guy if the conditions are improved. So when you see something that is, looks bad, like a living tree is being predated by a fungus or really by anything, the first thing you need to think about is, okay, what needs to be added here to make this right? And in this particular case, what do we need to reduce? And that would be the irrigation. So that's a kind of a short answer to a very big situation. Yeah. And one of the challenges is that the solution has been removal, dousing soil with fungicides, ripping everything out in order to deal with these problems. And do you get, and then never planting that tree again. And do you get a result that might, at least temporarily seem like it's a good result from that? You might. And so that has become the way things are dealt with because there's such a fear and there's the generally lack of understanding of soil health. But if you take your time and you find someone who is more of a soil health person instead of a kill and get rid of person, you can actually remediate many of these situations, through what I just said, really water management, and then also your plant management, making sure you have more biodiversity, and maybe in some cases, some kind of a spot treatment, very, very, very targeted treatment that is not like massive fungicide. Because when you put down a fungicide in a landscape, by the way, You kill the good guys and you kill the bad guys. And so all your other plants are now without that fungal network that supports them and helps them to need less water and be healthier. So go carefully.
Yeah. Well, that was a great way to wrap up our last class here.
Yes, thank you so much, everybody.
Yeah. So is there anything Veronica or Joe or Patrick,
Yes.
you popped on that you want to say before we wrap it up?
Yes, I would like to say that this was a fantastic class, and I would like to see it again, Marianne, okay? Because I have some questions. So I think if I watch it again, I can gain a better understanding. Not that Pamela did not explain it, but I want to watch it again. Okay, and then I have a question about the pruning. So does that include, let's say, like I have bushes that need to be trimmed every year? I mean, does that
Why?
does that mean pruning when you're trimming
Well,
your bushes?
okay, well, so whenever you cut a plant,
Yeah.
is not able to focus on its roots anymore. It focuses on fixing that thing that you just did. So if you're going to cut a shrub, let's say,
Yeah, yeah,
using like a trimmer on it is, first of all, the worst thing you could possibly do, because then everything inside dies and you only have living stuff on the outside. But very careful pruning in order to remove what is dead, diseased. What are they? It's dead, diseased,
Damaged
damaged,
and deranged.
and deranged,
I
right?
know, but Pamela, then it's going to get too big.
Why is it too big? Why did you plant it there?
It was here when I bought the house. When I mean,
Well, you're in a conundrum because the
yeah,
first thing about shrubs is to plant them in the right place, knowing the size that they're going to get so that you don't have to
yeah,
prune them, right?
right,
And
right,
that's the benefit of starting anew.
right.
Have a plant that's, in a place
Okay.
that there's nothing you can do.
Mhm.
Careful pruning, careful, minimal pruning.
Okay.
Yep,
I
that's
remember
it. I'm
Marianne at
sorry.
one time using the word bruising, that you're bruising the plants.
Yeah.
So, I get it. So, okay.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing is that all plants,
Mhm.
their entire life force, 80% of what is going on for them is happening in the soil. If their
Okay.
attention is diverted
Mhm.
to putting all their resources and energy into regrowing structure,
Okay.
that is going to be that's going to keep them from putting those resources into their roots, and so they become weaker. They may actually grow faster. So this is a conundrum with pruning, that sometimes when you prune regularly, the plant knows it's going to be pruned, actually,
Oh,
especially if there's a schedule, and
yeah.
the plant knows it's going to be pruned, and then it puts on ferocious amount of growth, and then it has to be pruned again. And so a strategy is to prune throughout the year, or
Right. Hmm.
throughout time, very small amounts,
Hmm.
so that you're just taking out what really, really needs for your aesthetic. I hate aesthetic pruning, but you
Yeah.
have to do it.
Hmm.
Um, so you're doing it throughout the year, and you're doing only a little bit at a time, so not all at one time, and you're also reducing the amount of water that it's getting. So
Mm.
you really, in general, right? When you prune a plant, it needs more water. I mean,
Oh,
pruning increases the water use.
okay.
So if you're pruning just a little bit over
Yeah.
the course of the year and you're reducing the amount of water, the plant may very well stop
Mhm.
putting on so much top growth. It
Mm.
may actually say, hey, I can't grow this much. I don't have the resources. I'm going to focus on what I, need to focus on, which is the roots. Not guaranteeing, but I'm saying that is a
Right.
strategy.
Very interesting. Thank you so much. This is a great class. Loved it.